It was shattered from all face, all square. So again a decision was taken, let us form for another organization. This time this organization should be much more stronger, much more capable of facing this kind of situation. And we know that another international organization was formed, and the name of this was So it was on 24th of October 1945. Another organization was formed, another body was formed, and it was named as the United Nations Organization, or the UNO as you better know as. It was on 24th of October, and remember, every year 24th of October it is actually on this particular day that the United Nations had come into existence. So we can see a quick recapitulation. We can see that fortunately the League of Nations was not successful in its endeavor to protect or prevent the outbreak of another war, and unfortunately another world war had taken place, that is the Second World War from 1939 to 1945, and after this war another organization was formed which still exists. Here you see the politics of the world, and this was the time the world has witnessed another important, or another geopolitical phenomenon, and that was known as the Cold War. Usually the timeline for the Cold War goes like this: 1947 to 1991, but as this word was used somewhere in the year 1945, so we take it from 1945 to 1991. Now, before starting, what do you mean by a Cold War? What was there in it? We will talk about the origin of the term Cold War, origin of the word. Now, this particular word, Cold War, it was first used by George Orwell on 19th of October 1945 in one of his important publications, which was You and the Atomic Bomb. This was for the first time this particular word Cold War have made its existence. However, the word was coined by, that means it was made famous, it was made popular, it was made significant by Bernard Baruch in the year 1947. This is the origin of the word Cold War, from where this word has come upon. It was first used by George Orwell, and next it was coined by Bernard Baruch. Now, after this, we have seen the origin of the word. Now we will see further that what the word Cold War actually means, or what had happened during this time. So, let us take the timeline for the Cold War between 1945 to 1991. Now, what had happened during this time? You know, this time, that means immediately after the Second World War, the whole world had got divided into two superpowers. If I take the world like this, the whole world, it got divided into two power poles, or two superpower blocks. One was the USA, that is the United States of America, and another one was USSR, that is Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The whole world got divided into two power poles. But the most interesting part of this is that, you know, these two superpowers, USA and the Soviet republics, these two together, they have fought against the Axis powers in the Second World War. Now they got into enemic, hostile relationship, conflictual relationship after the Second World War. But during the Second World War period, these two people, these two power blocks, you know, they have worked shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, and they have fought against the Axis powers during the Second World War period. But after the Second World War period, you can find that USA and USSR, they got divided into two hostile groups. One was USA and another one was USSR. Now the reason why, you know, USA, it believed in the ideology of, the main difference between the two superpowers was in its ideology. One believed in capitalism and the other believed in socialism. The two power blocks, they were actually divided in terms of their ideology. Whereas USA was fearing, it was of the opinion that communism or socialism, it was becoming popular and it was taking over the whole world. Especially after the Second World War, the Eastern Europe, parts of Eastern Europe, you know, communism had become very, very popular. It was becoming a very, very, you know, popular ideology which was taking over the world. And this was the major fear of USSR. On the other hand, USSR was fearing what? That USA would be taking over the world and it was having huge stocks of nuclear weapons. You know, from here only you can understand that these two power blocks, you know, they were having, what to say, hidden grudges or suspicion amongst both of them. And it was because of this, now the whole world came to be divided into two power poles. One was USA, one was USSR. Now, when the world got divided in this way, now both the superpowers, you know, what did they do? They did not stop there. Now, what they wanted was that they wanted to expand their influence. They wanted to make their own poles, own zones much more stronger, much more influential, much more expansive in nature. And so what did they do? They started entering into alliances with the other countries. Alliances means they started entering into friendship treaties. Friendship treaties with other countries of the world, as we usually do, you know, whenever you have a rivalry with your friend, so to make your side much more powerful, what do? You try to convince all the other friends at your own side, and the same way, against whom you are having a grudge, that person also does the same thing. So here also you can find that the same phenomena, the same scenario was going on. So USSR, it also set out to enter into alliances or a signing of treaties with other countries of the world, and the main treaties which USA floated, or the treaties which USA had signed with the other countries of the world, were NATO. NATO is what? North Atlantic Treaty Organization. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. North Atlantic means all the countries towards the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean. They entered into treaties with those countries, signing the NATO treaty. Then it was the SEATO. Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, that means Southeast Asian countries, all those countries with which USA had actually entered into friendship or alliances. Another one was the Centro, that means all the countries towards the central part of the world, and then ANZUS, that means Australia and New Zealand. So these were the treaties by which USA was making its own side much more stronger, much more powerful, much more influential. So USSR was also not staying behind. It tried to, actually what did it try to do? It tried to influence all those countries which were in favor of socialism or communism. And what was the treaty it floated, or what was the alliance by which it had made its side stronger? It was known as the Warsaw Pact. It was the Warsaw Pact by which USSR was entering into alliances or making friendship with the other countries, mainly those who were socialist or communist in their outlook, especially the Eastern European countries, many countries of Asia and many other countries with which those who have followed, those who believed in the ideology of socialism or communism. So we can see that both the superpowers, you know, they were in a, like what to say, race. They were in a race to gain support of most of the countries of the world. And those countries, those who have entered into alliances with the two superpowers, now what they were supposed to do? First of all, the countries who have signed alliances with USA, they were supposed to provide military help to USA whenever required. And not only that, whenever they would require any kind of help, USA would provide them with that. The same was here also. So it was like a treaty, it was like an agreement between the countries who were joining the superpowers, and they were signing treaties or pacts with them. This was the actually what was happening immediately after the Second World War. And we all know that, do you know the historic event by which the Second World War had come to an end? The historic event or the historic incident by which the Second World War had come to an end, it was the atomic bombing over the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So by this historic event, you know, both, it was a twin bombing over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in this respect, I want to draw your attention to the part where USSR, which was the time when USSR had come into existence. USSR had come into existence somewhere in 1917, immediately after the socialist revolution in Russia. Now these, why I am mentioning is that, you know, these come as short questions for your board examinations. And as you know, as far as the question pattern goes for CBSE, this for class 12 from this particular year is that too much of emphasis is given to objective type questions, and it's a very good scope for you to score higher marks or higher percentage. So you have to pay attention to these minute details from where you are having as many as 20 objective type questions. So the Second World War had come to an end with the historic event by the twin bombing over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is actually a flashback, and USSR had come into existence in 1917 after the socialist revolution in Russia. So now we are again coming back to the time between 1945 to 1991, where you can see that the world was immediately after the Second World War. Another event which had actually shook the nation, shook the whole world, was the concept, the birth of a new concept, and that was the Cold War. And what was the Cold War? It was during this period between 1945 to 1991. You can see that USA, the whole world got divided into two power poles or two super blocks. One was USA, another one was USSR, and the main clash was between ideological clash, whereas one believed in capitalism, another believed in communalism. Both of them, you know what, they were suspicious over the intentions of both, and they both wanted to increase their influence or power. And so what did they do? They started entering into alliances with all the other countries of the world. Now the question comes that, Miss, what do we mean by Cold War? Why is it known as, why this word cold is used? What is the significance of this word? You know, it was during this period from 1945 to 1991. It was a period of, please be very careful, it was a period of intense tension and a war-like preparations. You know, these are the things. Just imagine of those people, those who have witnessed the two world wars, that is from the First World War, the Second World War, and immediately after the Second World War, another new concept coming up. And some scholars, some people, some politicians, you know, they are of the opinion, they say that the Cold War was regarded to be much more miserable, much more devastating, much more destructive than even the hot wars, that is the two world wars. Now here you see I've used another word, hot war, that is the First World War and the Second World War. They are actually known as hot war, whereas the new term which we have introduced in this chapter is the Cold War, the time period between 1945 to 1991. And what had happened this period, we have already seen this part, and it was a period of intense tension. Intense means huge tension. And a war-like preparation was going on all throughout the world. Warlike preparations, what? You know, both the power blocks, they were actually making this side much more powerful. They were entering into treaties, their alliances, making friendship, and not only that, you know, they were stockpiling nuclear weapons. This was the horrible part of the Cold War. Nuclear weapons. In the other two world wars, we have seen the use of atomic bombing, but here in the Cold War period, we can see it was for the first time that nuclear weapons were used, and they are known as WMD. WMD means weapons of mass destruction. Mass means, you can understand, for the whole world. It's not that I am using a nuclear weapon, so I am safe, nothing will happen to me. But the one who is using the nuclear weapon, that person, that country, as well as the entire humanity will be actually coming to an end. It is so destructive, it is so devastating, it is so horrible. So both the power blocks, you know, it was an apprehension actually. They were supposing that another war would take place, and this time what they were doing, both the power blocks, they were trying to put up nuclear plants, and they were trying to accumulate as much nuclear weapons they could. And I told you that during this Cold War, these are some words which you have to write, is that it was a period of intense tension, you know, the whole world. And according to some, you know, some scholars, they define this Cold War period as the Third World War. According to them, it is nothing but a third world war. and it was a period of intense tension and warlike preparations, which means that the whole world was, it was like any moment the world would again get triggered into another world war. And it was because of this reason, this period is regarded to be much more period of tension other than the two world wars. Now, why Cold War? Because intense tension was there, warlike preparations were there, but these words you have to write, because if you miss out this word, then the definition of Cold War will not be complete, because intense tension and warlike preparation always takes place in any kind of war. But here you have to write what? Preparations, but in reality no actual war had taken place. This is the main point you have to you cannot skip out this point when you are answering as to what do you mean by a Cold War, or when you are writing in a subjective, that means a big long answer question about Cold War. It was an apprehension, it was an era where everybody was in this kind of a fear that any moment another world war would take place, and the whole world, the stage was getting ready, but in reality no actual war had taken place as had taken place in the earlier two world wars. It is this difference which termed it as Cold War, whereas the other two world wars, they are known as hot wars. Hot war, why? Because in reality a war had actually taken place. But here, there were preparations, there were tension, people were not at peace any moment, that they were always in a fear that, oh my God, any moment another world war would take place. So, but in reality no actual war had taken place, and it is for this reason it is known as Cold War, not simply war. All other wars which are overt means open, hot war means open or overt, but this was latent, that means it was hidden, covered, that means in reality it did not come out. So I suppose up till this part it is clear that we have talked about the first two. We have started from the beginning of the 20th century, when we have started about, it's just a recapitulation for the students, because this is international politics which you are starting new for the class 12 syllabus. So I'll just recapitulate once again whatever I have taught so far. It is like this, that we have talked about the two world wars, the first world war between 1914 to 1919, after which we can see that one organization was formed. The name of that organization was the League of Nations, but unfortunately the League of Nations was not successful with the task which was actually given to it, that means preventing the outbreak of another world war. Unfortunately the world had to witness another world war, and that was the Second World War, and which started somewhere from 1939 and it continued up till 1945, and after that we come to see that another organization was formed, and that organization do exist even today, and that was the United Nations Organizations, 24th of October 1945. And as I've told you, the 24th of October every year is celebrated as the United Nations Day. And before that, for your short question parts, these are the parts which I'm telling you, this will be very important for your short question. Again and again I'm repeating, children, you need to pay attention to those parts. And it was the Second World War had come to an end by the atomic bombing over the atomic bombings over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the USSR as a superpower or as a continent, it had come into existence in the year 1917 after the socialist revolution in Russia. And immediately after 1945, you can see that the world is now divided. Another new concept is coming up. Another new phenomenon has come up. Another new thing people are witnessing, that is the emergence of the Cold War. And it is during this Cold War period, you can see the whole world got divided into two power poles, because both of them were suspicious over the intentions of both, because there was a huge division between them in their ideology. One believed in capitalism, another believed in socialism or communism, and both the superpowers, they were trying very hard to make their side much more powerful, much more stronger. So they entered into alliances, they were signing treaties with many countries of the world, and this was at this juncture you can find out that nuclear weapons had made an entry, which are known as weapons of mass destruction. And what do you mean by Cold War? Why is it known as Cold War? I've told you, because the first two world wars which have taken place, they were overt. Overt means open, which had actually taken. People have seen them. They were known as Hot War and Cold War because it was latent. That means it did not actually take place, but a war-like preparation had always taken place. And it was for this reason that many people, many scholars are of the view, many people, academicians, they term this Cold War period as the Third World War. Now another question I have for you, it is that it can come as a subjective long question for you, either for 4 marks or 5 marks or 6 marks. So what you, as you know, the question paper pattern which you have, you know, I've told you that immediately after 1945, after the Second World War, another organization was formed. I suppose now you may be answering within yourselves only that after the Second World War, it was in 1945, another organization was formed, and the name of that organization was the UNO. Now my question is that the UNO was also entrusted with the same work, that is to prevent the outbreak of another world war. Now my question is that, do you really believe that UNO was successful in its work, in its task of preventing the outbreak of another world war or for restoration of world peace? Now here also you will find that there are two different opinions. Some say that yes, the UNO was successful. Why? Because in reality no actual war had taken place. But the people, those who say that this Cold War period as this Cold War as the Third World War, or the period of Cold War, you know, they regarded to be much more destructive, much more, you know, it was a period of intense tension. They say that unfortunately the UNO was not successful in its task of preventing another war, because only in reality war did not take place. There was not fighting, there was not people did not come out, they did not come out with guns and things like that, but everything, otherwise the stage was ready. There was tension, there was war-like preparation, everything was there, but in reality there was no actual war. Up till this, I suppose it is okay with the students. Now I will move to another very important part, which is again very, very important for you as a long question. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. You know, this was between 1945 to 1991, what we regard to be the time span of the Cold War. This was the year 1962. this was the most important year where there was all chances of the Cold War getting transferred into a hot war. Now, what happened actually? What is this incident? What happened in this year 1962? Why is it so important in the history of the Cold War? It was during this time, you know, Cuba. Have you heard about Cuba? Cuba is a Latin American country. Latin American, you can see that it is a part of America. Latin American country, and though being a part of America, it believed in it was strongly a supporter of socialism or communism. Being a small part of America, Latin America, you know, this Cuba country, you know, it believed in the ideology of socialism or communism, and it was directly controlled by the government of USSR. So, although being a part of America, that is Latin America, this country, you know, it believed in socialism, that is the ideology over which, that is USSR believed. Here I just wanted to tell you one thing is that USA, you know, the bloc which was known as USA, it was also known to be the Western Bloc, and the bloc which was USSR, it was also known as the Eastern Bloc. This is the part which I have missed out. Just so the Western Bloc was all those countries and USA, and Eastern one was USSR and other countries which were a part of it. So, Latin American country which believed in the ideology of socialism, and it was directly controlled by the government of USSR government, Soviet government. Now, USSR, you know, as you can see that this was the time, here you see the time, it is 1962, it was the peak time for the Cold War, and as USSR was suspecting, it was predicting that a war can take place. So, what it had done, you know, it had tried to send, you know, I'll try to draw it like a boat. I cannot draw, it's not possible for me to draw a ship here like this. All ships, you know, loaded with missiles, nuclear, they were all weapons, missile carrying ships. Where they wanted to send? They wanted to send it to Cuba. They wanted to make Cuba a missile base, so that if it is having a war with, if the USSR is having a war with USA, then it can use Cuba as a missile base. So, it was these are actually pre-war preparations. So, it was trying to keep Cuba as a missile base. But when America, that is USA, when it heard about this, when USA heard about it, it was very suspicious that what USSR is going to do, and especially a part of America, Cuba is a part of America. When it heard about it, what did it do, you know? Immediately it sent its forces and it tried to create a blockade. That means it will not allow the ships to enter into Cuba. Now, here was the time, this was the moment, this could have been the immediate cause when the Cold War would have turned into a hot war. And this decision was taken by Nikita Khrushchev of USSR, that missile carrying ships should be sent to Cuba. Why? Because they would be suspecting a war with USA, and Cuba would be turned into a missile base which can be of advantage for USSR when they were engaged in a war with USA. But when USA heard of it, they became suspicious, and what did they do? They have created a blockade for all the ships which were carrying missiles, and it was just here that the world would have witnessed another world war, that is the Third World War. But both the countries, both the superpowers, instead of going into further confrontations with each other, what did USSR do? It said that okay, no need to go into further confrontations. What did it do? It asked its ships to return back to USSR. And USSR also, it did not create much of problems, because it was, both the groups were tired, actually, so much of confrontation, so much of suspicion, so much of rivalry, and hence it was at this juncture the world was actually saved. I'll say that it was saved from from the misery of another world war. It was during this juncture, once again, it comes like a question like this: discuss the Cuban Missile Crisis. Or it could come like this, that which was the year, or which was the incident by which the Cold War would have turned into a hot war. You would have to have mentioned about the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, where this Cold War had all the possibilities of getting transformed into a hot war, but fortunately the world was saved. This was the story of. And after this, both the countries, they believed in détente. What is détente? Détente is a French term which means what? Pacifying relationships. That means peace. Pacifying, that is peace. And this date, it continued, détente, it had continued for several years. And afterwards we will see that this was actually the old Cold War. Old means from the beginning, and after that we will see that again we will see the emergence of new Cold War, that is later on. Now here comes the question. As we belong to India, we are proud citizens of India. Now the question comes, if the world was divided into two power blocks, USA, USSR, one believing in capitalism, another believing in socialism, so where was India? Which bloc did India sign with? Which bloc did India join hands with? Now here comes another important concept makes its entry, and that was non-alignment. In terms of development, countries are divided into two groups. One, the developed countries. Now the developed countries are again divided into two. One is the first world developed countries. First world developed countries. First world means countries which are very developed from the very beginning, that is USA, Britain and all these countries. And within the developed countries you have the second world developed countries which have become developed later on, like China and the others, and other countries who are actually known to be developing countries. Developing. That means that these countries have not yet reached their goal of development, and they are known as the third world countries. third world countries. They are better known as developing countries or third world countries, and all the countries, you know, those who belong to this category, they have more or less the same history. That means they have been colonies of mainly the Europeans. They have been colonies of the Europeans. They have been victims of colonial exploitation. That means all the resources, these foreign powers, they have come, they have exhausted, they have drained out all the resources which these countries had. For example, India, you know that India have been colonies to the Portuguese, to the French, as well as, you know best that the Europeans, the Britishers had come to India, and they have stayed in India for 200 years. They have drained all the resources, and you know that India was once upon a time famed to be the richest country in the world, but unfortunately we are now belonging to the category of developed countries. Why? Because they have all been the victims of colonial exploitation, and all their resources have been drained out. So another concept which is non-alignment, and what did I say? That what about India and all the other neighboring countries of India? Which group did they join? Either USA or USSR. You know, these developing countries, especially India and you know, many other countries like Egypt, you have many African countries, you know, they did not join with any of the power blocks, and they have created, or they were actually fixed at another concept, and that was known as non-alignment. Non-alignment means not becoming a part of any of power blocks. Excuse me. Non-alignment is a policy by which the countries, they did not become a part of any of the power blocks. But while you are defining what do you mean by non-alignment, be very particular, students, that don't use the word like, you never use these words, neutrality, never use these words, neutrality, non-involvement, things like that. Never use these words, because if you use these kinds of words, what will happen? It will give a negative meaning to the word non-alignment. It was a term which meant that especially developing countries, they did not become a part of any of the power blocks. They maintained a separate existence. That doesn't mean that they had become completely off from the world politics. They were there, they were playing an important role in world international politics without joining any of the power blocks. What did they try to do? They wanted to reduce the tensions between the two power blocks. So you cannot write non-involvement or neutrality. That doesn't mean that they were off the screen. No, they were there. The non-aligned countries, the developing countries, they had played an active role in this period in the international politics, without joining any of the two power blocks, what did they do? They tried to reduce the tension between the two power blocks and to save the world from the scourge of another world war. So non-alignment. And you know, many people, those who were actually involved in the creation of this particular concept of non-alignment, or the credit for creation of non-alignment, was, we all know, that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru from India. Then you have Abdel Nasser. Then you have Joseph Broz Tito. Then you have President Sukarno of Indonesia. And next you have Kwame Nkrumah. Later on he joined, from Ghana. These were the masterminds who have actually given birth to the concept of non-alignment. So you can find, and many of them, you know, were like, non-alignment was never neutrality, was never non-involvement. It was not that. It was actually the countries who had been victims of colonial exploitation. Instead of joining with any of the power blocks, they knew that they could not afford getting into confrontation with any of the power blocks. So what did they do? They had made another block, another zone, and that was known to be the non-alignment zone. And non-aligned, alignment means treaty. As you know, that alignment is treaty making. So they did not sign a treaty with any of the power blocks. They kept away from it, but playing a very important role in international politics by reducing the Cold War tension. So we can come to the end of this part is that, so you can see that how the Cold War has made its emergence. Then you can see the birth of two power blocks. Then you can see the point where Cold War had reached its peak to turn into a hot war. And another concept which has come up mainly for the developing countries of the world was non-alignment. And it was here, it was in this non-alignment group that many of the developing countries had actually become a part of it. But here I want to mention one thing, is that if you see the preamble of India, India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic country. That is socialism. That means India, you know, from its very heart, it wanted to become a part of USSR, because USSR was also believed in the ideology of socialism. But you know, Jawaharlal Nehru had taken a very good wise step, because said that entering into confrontation with both those power blocks, because those power blocks were mainly all the developed countries, so entering with them would be very risky to go against America at that very moment. So they wanted to stay away from it, and they had formed a third front, that is the non-alignment. Up till this is your first chapter. I suppose you have understood. Please be very careful about the parts where small questions, where short questions can come, and I have told you that the parts where short questions could have come and the parts where long questions could come. Like we discussed the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you find the relevance of? And one more thing, you know, so non-alignment, it continued up till 1991. Another question comes that after 1991, when the Cold War had, that is another chapter, you will get it, the end of the Cold War, that is another chapter. So we will see that what role will be played by the non-aligned countries after the end of the Cold War. Thank you very much.
এখানে বসে তাহলে আর বাইরে বেরোতে হবে, বাইরে তো ইয়ে রয়েছে,
কি রয়েছে?
মশা রয়েছে।